Over the past few decades, we have, as a people, been engaged in several different kinds of social wars, if you will. It started in the 80s and 90s with the war on drugs. Then in the 2000s, we had the war on terror. And in the modern era, we have what is called Don't Tolerate Intolerance, but what is effectively the war on hate. Now, I've found over time that each one of these has gotten stupider. I've never liked any of them. The war on drugs was basically just a pointless feel-good campaign made by politicians so they could throw their weight around and just get people in trouble for doing what were before minor things and what were then held up to a moral high ground, and the crime increased exponentially. For that said, they were at least going after a tangible thing. You were trying to stop people from using drugs, something that they had to go out of their way to get. That's not me defending it. It's me showing that while idiotic, it was tangible. The war on terror that followed was even stupider. Effectively, there is no win condition for this because you are fighting to make sure people aren't scared. Well, you're fighting an emotion, a reaction. Now, there are some people that will say that that's not what it meant, that it meant terrorists, which, while tangible, I would argue is impossible to do as well, because at any point in time in society there have been what we would today look at as terrorists. It's impossible to stop that. You can reduce it, you can relatively control it, but you can't stop it, and therein lies the key thing. And the idea that we were going to wage a war to stop all terrorism everywhere, or worse, the act of being afraid, is ludicrous, and that was idiotic and has come around to be seen as insane. Now, the left for the past 3-4 years has pushed this idea that we as a people should not tolerate intolerance, and this has been shown time and time again, basically to translate to be bigots against the people that we deem are bigots, who usually aren't, by the way, but that's another point entirely. And the way that it's being done and the way that it's said, having grown up during the war on terror and the tail end of the war on drugs, I can safely say that this is just a new age marketing way of selling the war on hate. That's all it is. And to the left's credit, a thing that sometimes upsets me to say, given the current state of the left, they have always been good at marketing. They've always been good at figuring out how to word something to make it sound better than it otherwise would. The right is usually very direct, often to their detriment. The left have a lot of social degrees and have a lot of speaking experience and marketing experience, so they know how to phrase things to make it appear better. Like this, don't tolerate intolerance, because like 99.9% of people are against intolerance as a general thing. Granted, it's going to matter to what degree you're talking about, because the left is going full on, we are going to be intolerant to intolerance, and whoever we don't like is intolerant, which is a big part of the problem, but again, that's another talking point entirely. Whereas if you said it just directly what it is, the war on hate, people would hear that and go, this is bullshit. You can't stop that. For as stupid as the war on terror was, you could at least make the argument that you were fighting against terrorists, another tangible thing. The war on hate, who are you fighting against? You are quite literally just trying to stop people from hating. You can't. That's impossible. That is an emotion. You cannot kill an emotion. At least not yet. I pray to God we have never hit that dystopian future. You cannot stop an emotion. You cannot stop a reaction. You cannot stop a feeling. Those are things you cannot fight. You have to fight tangible things. And even then it can be stupid. Point back to war on drugs. But to go after just an emotion entirely is nonsensical to a degree that I can't even begin to properly explain. And yet, here we are. For the past 3 or 4 years, this is what the left has been pushing. And especially in the last few months, it has just ramped up to a degree that scares me, actually. The Covington kid. Don't tolerate intolerance. He's fucking smiling. It's like that awkward, what exactly is going on here kind of smile. Don't tolerate intolerance. The okay hand sign. We must now punish people for being intolerant by going okay. Uh-huh. And so on and so forth. It's mind-numbing and terrifying to a degree that startles me, and I'm glad that it hasn't been made into a law yet, but there are bits and pieces that you can see. For example, pretty much every website that exists right now has a policy against dead naming or misgendering. The problem is that while they all say you cannot intentionally do that, how do you prove intent unless the person specifically says, I am intentionally doing this? What if someone accidentally does it? And then the person that got upset says, well, they intentionally did it. And you say, no, I didn't. That was just a mistake. Unless you're just quite literally going with a he said, she said style story and nobody wins. Who exactly do you believe in that? And whose side would you take? And I'm pretty sure a lot of people would know which side the sites would take because they seem to have a bit of a direction they lean. But I'm just saying from a logical standpoint, how the fuck do you prove that unless how do you prove intent unless the person flat out says this was my intent? And who the fuck would be stupid enough to say that to then get themselves booted off the site? You see the problem here. And yet, a lot of other things keep pushing. It's these little incremental things. And that's what I always talk about. That's why I talk about all these things that, in the grand scheme of things, are very small. Because it's these little increments, these little pushes. You just do a little more, and a little more, and a little more, and suddenly you make it illegal to spread. If you have penis, it is now illegal for you to spread your legs on a fucking subway train at 2 in the morning when there's nobody else around in New York. Yes, there was someone charged for that. I'm not making that up. It's these small increments that matter. And that is what I'm trying to point to. That is why I have come to call Don't Tolerate Intolerance as the war on hate, and why I feel a lot of other people should whenever they see this, because if people see this for what it really is, as the war on hate, then it will be laughed into non-existence, because the war on drugs was seen as a complete failure and a joke. The war on terror has always been a joke. The war on hate, if it weren't for the fact that they've already pushed so hard for it, would be the biggest punchline I've seen. So, the next time you see someone saying that you shouldn't tolerate intolerance, just remind them of how successful, just ask them how successful their war on hate really is. And watch the reaction to that. You will love it. It's been Math Machine. Not tolerating intolerance, but not tolerating the war on hate either, because that's fucking idiotic. Peace out.